My stepbrother insisted that I leave the house during my stepfather's burial, believing it was his. Until the will revealed otherwise. 38-year-old Jake never imagined I would be getting ready for the burial of my stepfather. Memories sweep back like a tidal wave as I sit here organizing old pictures and planning. Death seems to cause one to consider a lifetime of events, both positive and negative. At 9 years old, my mother Sarah married Richard, my stepfather. The wedding day seems to me like yesterday. Mom looked lovely in her basic white outfit, hope beaming in her eyes for a fresh start. Richard, on the other hand, seemed to be stressing his austere attitude by wearing a black suit. Even on what ought to have been a happy occasion, he insisted on a solemn demeanor that I would come to know all too well over the years. Richard was a rigid man right from the beginning. Particularly when he turned to face me, he always seemed to be permanently frowning. Often I questioned whether he simply had the means to relate to a child who wasn't his own or if he harbored resentment at having to assume the position of stepfather. Growing up with Richard was not easy. From my grades to my wardrobe to even how I handled my fork at meals, he attacked everything I did. "You need to work harder, or this cruel world will chew you up and spit you out," he said almost daily. Looking back, I wonder if Dad was attempting to equip me for life in his own flawed manner. Even if at the time I believed he was just being nasty. His rigidity permeated every sphere of our life. I had to sit up straight, use the proper fork, and only spoke when spoken to during family get-togethers. Any departure from his expectations was greeted with a stinging stare or a harsh correction. Family vacations, which ought to have been lighthearted and leisureful, were more like military drills than pleasure excursions. Richard would schedule everything down to the last minute, heaven help us should we stray from the plan. One vacation I recall we missed a turn and arrived at a museum 15 minutes late. For the rest of the day Richard was in a terrible mood, grumbling about lost time and inadequate preparation. Everything changed 3 years following the wedding when my stepbrother Michael was born. Richard suddenly had his own son, and it was obviously clear whose favorite was. He poured love and compliments on Michael. Richard's smile was unlike anything I'd seen till he held his newborn kid. It revealed a part of Richard I never knew existed, like a switch had been turned on. I was envious and furious. When I was 12 years old, I couldn't comprehend why Michael received all the love and attention while I just got harsh looks and criticism. The difference was clear and agonizing. Michael's achievements, no matter little, were honored with great celebration. Even if they were notable, my own successes were greeted with a nod and a remark on how I can improve next time. Mom would try to reassure me when I protested to her about the unfair treatment. "Richard loves you too, Jake," she would say, her eyes begging me to understand. "That's just rough love. He wants you ready for the world." Still, it didn't feel like love to me. It seemed like continual disappointment as Richard saw me always failing. Our family dynamic changed in ways I never would have predicted throughout the years. Mom became ill at 25, and we all gathered around her. Richard stayed stoic even then, but I sensed compassion when he felt nobody else was looking. When Mom thought I wasn't in the room, I would observe him softly changing her pillows or crutching her hand. It was the first time I understood that Richard's lack of affection could have been more a result of his personal constraints than of his sentiments for us. 2 years later Mom passed away, and it felt as though the glue keeping our family intact had broken. Tears and quiet prayers defined the funeral. Richard stood like a monument all through the service, his face a blank mask. Though the wall between us seemed insurmountable, I wanted to get in touch with him to express our loss. Then 21 Michael left soon after Mom passed away. He launched his own family after tying the knot with Emma, his high school sweetheart. It was only me and Richard in that large mansion loaded with memories suddenly. I gave moving out some thought as well, but something held me back. Perhaps it was a feeling of obligation, or perhaps deep down I was still that small boy yearning some indication of approval from the guy who had been my father figure for most of my life. Looking after Richard in his latter years was difficult. Fighting the restrictions his aging body placed on him, he was as tenacious and critical as always. There were days when our conflict was so thick you could cut it with a knife. But occasionally too I felt short sparks of thanks in his eyes. Like the time I stayed up all night with him during a sick attack, or when I learnt to make his preferred foods as he grew too frail to stand at the stove himself. Those were uncommon events though, and most of the time I felt as though I was looking after a stranger who happened to live in my house. We were living in a tense truce, neither of us entirely sure how to close the distance that had widened between us over years. Richard's character made me never even consider entering a relationship or getting married. I wanted none of the same issues I was experiencing from my wife or girlfriend to confront. Richard's gone at 65, taken unexpectedly in the evening from a heart attack. Everyone is showing their respect as I get ready for his burial. Michael arrived with Emma and their children, Lily 5 years old and Max 3 years old. I hadn't seen him in years until now. Though he seems older and more austere, I recall from our early years that he exudes entitlement about everything. The funeral was a depressing event. I stood there listening to people talk about Richard, a fantastic man who always placed family first, a pillar of the community, and I wanted to find fun in the irony of it all. Knowing the same man I did they? To me, the Richard they described seemed to be a stranger. Michael drew me aside as folks were departing once it was all over. I considered that perhaps he wished to assist each other in our sadness, to reconnect, or to share memories of our childhood. Rather, he delivered a startling blow that left me whirling. "So, about the house," he said. His voice laid back as though we were talking about the temperature. "I'll need you to leave by the end of the month." "Not sure," I glanced at him. "What are you talking about?" He groaned and cast an intentionally obtuse glance at me. "Clearly, the house. Dad turned it over to me. Ultimately, I am his genuine son. You never imagined he would leave it to you?" I thought of myself as having been gutly pounded. This was how it turned out, all these years of trying to be the son Richard wanted and of looking after him. Part of me wanted to fight for what I felt I had earned over years of conscientious living. But another side of me, the one still feeling like that 9-year-old lad yearning for affirmation, wanted to withdraw. "Fine," I answered, my voice empty. "I'll be out by the end of the month." Not only for Richard, but for the family I never really had, for the bond I had always hoped would grow between Richard and me but never did, as I watched Michael walk away arm around Emma, kids running ahead. That evening I began packing among boxes of memories I wasn't sure I wanted to save. Sorting through years of accumulated belongings, I couldn't help but wonder whether Richard had been right all along. Sometimes you still ended up with nothing to show for it. The world was harsh. Update: I sold out of my childhood house a week ago. For now, Mom's sister Linda is here with me trying to decide what to do next. Thinking about Michael and how we got here, I lie awake at night staring at the foreign ceiling. Michael obviously was the preferred child growing up. Richard doted on him in a way he never did with me from the time he was born. Birthday celebrations with all his friends invited, new toys just because, please smiles when he brought home a good report card, all things I had longed for but never received. I recall one birthday Michael was around 8 years old. Richard hired a whole arcade for his buddies and himself. At the time, I was 17 and couldn't help but contrast it with my own birthdays, which often featured a quiet meal and perhaps a small gift. But Michael aged and something changed. The sweet little lad who used to follow me about wanting to play developed into a depressed adolescent who appeared to hate everything and everyone. He started to treat me like I was invisible and spoke angrily back to our parents. It was like seeing a stranger seize my little brother's body. One specific occasion comes to mind when he was around 16. Richard asked us about his marks when we were having dinner. Richard asked us both this kind of inquiry all the time. It was a regular one. Michael burst this time though. He began screaming about how he despised living under Richard's control and how sick he felt of the pressure. He bolted from the house, slamming the door so fiercely a picture fell from the wall. Richard seemed to be sitting there, looking older and sadder than I had ever seen him. Instead of the angry man I had anticipated to pursue Michael and drag back. Michael's behavior just became worse as he grew older. He began courting a series of girls, each relationship ending hazily. Late nights, missing curfews, and shouting battles with Richard that rocked the home abound. I tried to keep out of it, but the continual stress would inevitably affect me. Michael laughed it off when Richard tried to discuss respect and duty. "You can't control me anymore," he would say, and Richard would get this expression, a mix of wrath and despair, that I had never seen before. Then arrived the day he turned up with Emma as his bride. Not even among us knew he was seeing someone seriously, let alone getting ready for marriage. Walking in with Emma, little more than a teenage herself, he said they had eloped. I shall never forget Richard's expression. For once, he was silent. Mom tried to calm things down and welcome Emma into the family, but the air was clearly charged. Richard seemed to be straining to keep his cool and to find the proper words to speak to his kid. Emma claimed she wanted to live free from family meddling, apart. Michael thus packed his luggage and left, simply as that. He pledged to visit and keep in touch, but those pledges soon dropped off the list. Weeks became months devoid of his communication. His calls were always quick and often tinged with conflict. I assumed definitely he would come back when Mom fell ill, but he did not. He asked her periodically how she was doing, but always had a reason for why he couldn't visit. Work was hectic, the kids were sick, the car was in the shop. Something was always there. Hoping it would be Michael, I recall sitting next Mom's hospital bed and seeing her eyes flash every time the phone rang. More usually than not, it wasn't. It was me who had to phone Mom to let her know she died. He sounded very offended, full of regret for not visiting more frequently. He claimed he would try to make it to the funeral, but ultimately he did not show up, just a flower arrangement delivered to the funeral house accompanied by a card offering his sympathies. Feeling his absence like a physical hurt, I stood at the burial wondering how we had become so far apart. And right now here we are. Not motivated by love or obligation, the prodigal son returns for what he can gain. Thinking about how he swooped in and grabbed the house, acting as though he had some right to do so when he had left us years earlier, makes me enraged. I consider all the evenings I spent seeing to Richard, all the doctor's visits I accompanied, all the meals I made, and all the expenses I paid. And for what? To be thrown aside just like I never really mattered at all. But my phone calls as I'm staggered in these terrible ideas. It is Mr. Thompson, Richard's attorney. Telling me he has to talk about something vital, he sounds serious and asks me to come back to the house tomorrow. Uncertain on what to believe. Part of me hopes there's a mistake and maybe I won't have to abandon my house after all. Knowing how let down I have been in the past, another side of me is terrified to hope. I wonder what tomorrow will hold as I hang up the phone. Whatever it is, I am clear one thing. This is not going to be easy. I toss and turn the remainder of the night, my head ablaze with possibilities. Something so crucial that Mr. Thompson had to see me personally. Richard left something for me after all. Is it conceivable? Alternatively, is this only another letdown in a long run of disappointments? Feeling like a stranger, I stood before my childhood house the next day. To my astonishment, Michael's car was also in the driveway already. Breathing deeply, I entered. The familiar creak of the front door sent a pulse through me. Sitting at the dining room table, Mr. Thompson had a stack of documents before him. There were Michael and Emma as well, clearly agitated. With his demeanor unreadable, the attorney motioned for me to sit down. Seated, well aware of the tension in the room. "Thank you all for coming," he said with a firm businesslike voice. "I know this is a tough period, but there are some crucial issues about Richard's will we should talk about." Michael slanted forward, a smug grin on his face. "Let's wrap this up. I would want to start right away as I have plans for this home." Mr. Thompson cleared his throat, seeming uncomfortable. "We should really talk about that. Richard's will states that Jake has been left the house and in fact all of his possessions." The room went still for a time. I felt as though I couldn't breathe. Had I heard him precisely? After all these years of believing I was never good enough, Richard had left everything to me. The first to react was Michael. "What?" he yelled, leaping to his feet so fast his chair dropped backwards. "That's not possible. Real son of his father is me. He wouldn't hand everything to Jake." Mr. Thompson stayed cool under Michael's rage. "I'm rather worried it's rather obvious. Richard's will specifically says that Jake is to inherit all of his possessions, including the house, his savings, and his personal items." What I was hearing defied belief. It seemed illogical. Those years of criticism, of feeling as though I could never measure up, and now this. Michael was pacing now, his face flushed with rage. "This is nuts. When he composed this, he must have been insane. I'll dispute it. I'll bring this before court." Mr. Thompson gave a head shake. "That is not what I would counsel. Richard prepared this will rather carefully. He included a letter outlining his choice and had it attested and notarized. Challenging effectively would be quite difficult." Michael turned to face me, his eyes flaming with resentment. "You did this, did not you? You somehow twisted him against me." Still in disbelief personally, I raised my hands. "About any of this I knew nothing. I assumed he was forwarding everything to you." Before things could get much more heated, Mr. Thompson stepped in. "If I may, I think Richard's letter might help to clarify his choice." Pulling out an envelope, he started to read. "To his sons, should you be reading this, I am gone. Though I hope I can clarify, I know your two may find my choice shocking. I have made lots of mistakes over my life. Among my largest was not treating both of my sons equally in terms of love. I expected too much from Jake, was too demanding, never showed enough affection. And I treated Michael too kindly. I never set appropriate limits or imparted any lessons of value. As I considered my life in my last years, I came to see something crucial. A real son is defined by behavior rather than blood. And in that sense, Jake behaved as a real son ought to. He stayed with me through trying circumstances and looked after me even when I didn't deserve it. All the traits I attempted to teach but failed to show myself, patience, kindness and responsibility, he exhibited. I am so leaving everything to him, not as a punishment to Michael but rather as a tribute to the kid who really embodied the ideals I cherish. I hope you both have the compassion to see and pardon the errors of an elderly guy." The room went still once Mr. Thompson closed his book. Tears came to me, a lifetime of feelings rising inside me. All those years I felt Richard didn't care, that he considered me a disappointment. But he had been observing, noting, valuing in his own unique sense. Michael froze momentarily, his face a mask of shock and rage. Then he silently seized Emma's hand, rushed out, slammed the door behind him. His automobile started up and ran out of the driveway. The last act of disobedience was a tire screech. Turning to me, Mr. Thompson wore a gentle grin. "I know this is a lot to absorb, Jake," he continued. "Richard expressed his preferences quite precisely. He wished for you a safe future free from financial concerns." I nodded, still not sure I understood exactly what had transpired. "Thank you," I managed to say. "I need some time to consider all this." Mr. Thompson stopped as he neatly folded his documents. "There is still one more item. Your stepfather left you a personal note as well. You read it in private?" he questioned. He gave me an envelope with my name written in Richard's recognizable handwriting on it. I took it knowing that within our words I had waited a lifetime to hear with shaky hands. I sat by myself in the quiet house flipping the envelope in my hands after Mr. Thompson departed. At last I plucked the will to open it and read. "Jake dear, though I know I've never been excellent at communicating my emotions, hopefully this letter will help to offset some of my faults. I'm glad of the man you have evolved into. Though I failed as a parent, I had a challenging upbringing and never taught appropriate affectionate behavior. I reasoned that the best way to equip you for life was to be rigorous and challenge you. I regret the suffering I caused you. Now I understand I was mistaken. Particularly in these last several years, your compassion and commitment have shown me what actual strength and integrity look like. You now more than ever reflect the guy I always dreamed you would be. I apologize for not telling you these things when I was living. With my last wishes and this letter, maybe, you will have some peace and protection. Remember yourself, son. You are deserving of all the joy available. Love, Richard." Tears came down my face as I closed the book. All those years of feeling inadequate, of thinking Richard didn't care, and now this was overpowering. Over the next days I battled to make sense of everything. Once a cause of stress and bad memories, the house felt different now. It belonged to me, in a deeper sense as much as legally. It was evidence of Richard's affection, sincere if spoken too late. Michael hasn't gotten in touch since he departed that day. Not sure whether he will. Though I know it will take time, part of me hopes we can reconcile someday. The pain is still raw, and our distance seems more than it did years ago. I have given family, the complexity of love and the numerous ways people show it a lot of thought. Though often harsh, Richard's love was sincere. It was flawed. In his own sense, he was working to equip me for life and build my resilience. Though I wish he could have discovered a softer approach, I now better understand him. Regarding inheritance, it goes beyond just money and real estate. One has responsibility. Richard trusted me to continue on his legacy and to live the ideals he loved. Although it's a difficult work, I'm resolved to meet expectations. I have chosen to create a scholarship fund in Richard's name from a portion of the bequest. It's for children from difficult situations so they may have the education and chances they might otherwise miss. Taking the teachings he imparted on me and paying them forward seems like the proper approach to honor his memory. I'm still trying to make sense of everything as I sit here now in the house that turned unexpectedly into mine. Fathers and sons have a complex relationship marked by frequently unsaid feelings and misunderstandings. Richard and I never had the relationship I wanted when he was alive, but his last act has given me an opportunity to better know him, to see the love always there, buried under the surface. I wish Dad had told me these things during his lifetime. We could have had talks, cleared the air, perhaps even created the relationship I so yearned for. But life does not always provide us tidy ends or flawless closure. Right now, I'm concentrating on respecting Richard's memory by practicing the ideals he sought to inculcate in me. Work hard, be conscientious, and most importantly, love those who matter. I'm glad to be carrying on a legacy. Looking ahead, I experience a range of emotions: sadness for what was lost, thankfulness for what I have, and hope for what is to come. Richard's unexpected legacy has given me a fresh perspective of family, love and forgiveness in addition to financial stability. Though I never expected it, this is a new chapter in my life and I am ready to face it, bearing with me the lessons of the past and hope for a better future. That might ultimately be the best inheritance of all.
Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.
I broke up with my girlfriend because she wanted to stay a virgin. Now she wants to get back together but had sex with someone else during our breakup. I, a 23-year-old male, met my ex-girlfriend, a 21-year-old female, 3 years ago. We lived on campus at university in different halls of residence. After a few months, we got together and for the most part had a very happy relationship. There was always one issue though. My ex grew up in a very religious home. Her father is a pastor. She has been open with her family that she does not share their faith. They weren't happy about it but accepted that she has to make her own choices on that. Nevertheless, I think some of that religious upbringing was still in her mind. I grew up in a different religion but was never very serious about it and am no longer religious. Our relationship was pretty normal except that she told me very early that she was a virgin and wanted to stay that way until she was married. It wasn't for religious reasons, as I mentioned she isn't religious. But she was very focused on not disappointing her dad. We did other sexual things, just not intercourse. I never had much luck with girls growing up and going into the relationship I was a virgin. And I still am, at least if you classify being a virgin as never having had intercourse. Anyway, I was becoming more resentful of the fact that everyone I know was having normal sexual relationships and we weren't. I couldn't understand why she didn't want to have a full sexual relationship, though of course I never pressured her about it. I felt that while I was at university, and pretty broke, getting married was something for the future. Last year, I was in my last year of university and she was working in her first professional job. Her degree was shorter than mine, so she finished university first despite being younger than me. She was talking a lot about all these successful guys she met at work, which did make me feel lesser as I was still a broke university student. Coupled with her still not wanting a full sexual relationship, it did make me feel more resentful. We had some arguments about it and after a while I felt that I should end the relationship as we wanted different things and our lives were on different paths. It was awful. She was crying a lot and I felt terrible afterwards. Anyway, it has been nearly 6 months since we broke up. We haven't been in touch at all for most of that time. I have not been involved with anyone else in that time, as I was 100% focused on finishing my degree. I have finally finished university and am about to start my first professional job. She recently got in touch again and asked to meet up. I was hesitant but decided we had so much good history that I should hear her out. She told me she's been missing me terribly these past 6 months. That she thinks she wants to get back together and is open to having a sexual relationship now. I asked her why now. What changed? And she looked uncomfortable. After a little prying, she said she had a short-term fling with one of the older guys at work while we were broken up. Which of course was fine as she wasn't my girlfriend anymore. Anyway, she said he persisted with her until she started having sex with him. She ended it with him recently. She was clear that it was consensual, but that the guy was very persistent with pursuing sex with her. I was gutted. I couldn't understand why she'd make me wait all those years, but was fine doing it with some new guy she'd only been seeing a short time. I asked if the reason she was open to having a sexual relationship now is because she wasn't a virgin anymore. She said yes. I asked her to give me some space to process all this. I'm conflicted and would love some advice on this. I have missed her a lot and still have strong feelings for her. But at the same time it feels like I was strung along for years. It's hard to put my finger on why I don't want to take her back. Everything logically makes sense for us to get back together. I'd even get to finally have a sexual relationship with her. But I feel awful about this whole thing and don't want to ignore those feelings. Some of the comments are being very harsh on my ex. And I guess that's not surprising. You don't know her. She's not some evil manipulative villain. At all. I would never have been with anyone like that. She's still the funny, smart, charming, beautiful girl I always knew. Any guy would be lucky to have her. I would be too if I could handle the baggage here, but I'm thinking I probably can't and a clean break is the way to go. Though she may regret the relationship with the other man, it's not my business as she was a single woman and we broke up. I wasn't ever expecting to hear from her again really. This whole situation is very surprising to me. I'm feeling hurt because I guess this is a solid blow to my ego. That I feel like the lesser man here. I can own that, and that's something for me to work on. Ultimately I have some hang-ups about sex from this relationship that I need to deal with. A few people have suggested I could benefit from therapy. I'm going to look into that. I think I need help to process all these emotions from this situation. Relevant comments. I would ask her why she was willing to sleep with this guy after such a short relationship but after 3 years she was not willing to sleep with you. OP's reply, I think this is the right question. Because I don't know why, she didn't say. All she said was that the guy was persistent. I'm torn about whether to simply text her that I don't want to rekindle things and leave it all in the past. Or whether I should ask more questions about what happened. Because this hurts. I don't know if I'm ready to get details of her relationship with the other guy. Sometimes I just feel like I'm stunted in some way. A few comments have said I'm immature, and they're probably right. I know I'm the one who ended the relationship and that she's entitled to do what she wants with anyone else. Still doesn't make it hurt any less. And maybe it's just best to say goodbye and leave all this in the past. Update 1. Hello again. I appreciate people taking the time to comment on my last post. The response was a lot more than I expected, with over 2,000 comments. I'm amazed so many people wanted to comment about my situation. Thank you. Warning, this post is long. I have kept a daily journal since I was 16. A lot of what follows is dumped from my journal. Yes, I know I'm not concise. I'm going to refer to my ex as Ellie, not her real name. I'd like to write a bit about the comments because so many people took the time to provide their thoughts, and I appreciate that. The majority of comments were some variation of move on. A clean break. A strong recommendation with a lot to recommend it. A minority said give her a chance and see how it goes. Plenty calling me an arsehole for ending it because I wanted sex in our relationship, or for being obsessed with her virginity. That I dumped her because she wouldn't put out. And quite a few saying my breaking up with her made her feel like sex is necessary to keep a guy, and that it drove her heartbroken into the next guy's bed. There were a few she's pregnant comments. Not that I know of, it's not impossible, but if that happens it won't be anything to do with me. The dude's saying I should fuck her and leave her, or worse, seriously, some of you guys need a hug or a psychologist. No, I would never use her like that, no matter our past. Ellie and I were a loving couple for years. That counts for something even after we broke up. Feeling hurt doesn't justify using her, or anyone else for that matter. As for comments that I have some hang up about taking her virginity. My issue when together was that we weren't having sex in our relationship, not whether she was a virgin or not. Her being a virgin was her reason for being abstinent, but wasn't directly an issue either way to me. If she hadn't been a virgin and wanted to be abstinent, I would have been in the same situation. Bear in mind, for 3 years Ellie had everything she wanted from our relationship. Boyfriend, love, affection, loyalty, support, and a guy who respected her wishes to be abstinent. While she got 100% of what she wanted, for me there was a big element missing. And there was no way to reconcile that. Either we were having sex or not having it. Sex requires both to say yes, and that wasn't going to happen. With hindsight, I should have ended the relationship early on, when Ellie first told me she wanted to not have sex until marriage. When we got together, I was a naive 19-year-old who had never had a girlfriend before, so I kind of went along with things because I really liked her and got along with her so well. I fell in love with her and then kind of felt stuck in a relationship that wasn't what I wanted. I've learned from this and won't make that mistake in the future. I want to make active, not passive choices in future relationships. To not just go along with things because that's what the other person wants. Our views about sex in our relationship were not compatible, so I ended the relationship rather than waiting any longer hoping she'd change her mind. It was scary to take that step, and I put it off for way too long, because I didn't want to hurt her. But I couldn't stay in the relationship just for her. I had to also consider myself too. My mistake was waiting so long to get to that point. I regret that, as it caused her more hurt than if I'd ended it early on. Many of you say that sex just isn't that important. But for me it is, at least as part of a relationship. You can disagree. That's fine. Some people are fine being in no-sex relationships. No judgment from me, but that's not what I want. Some people took issue with me saying I felt she strung me along. On reflection, that's fair. Ellie was clear to me about wanting to not have sex until marriage. I foolishly stayed way too long hoping she'd change her mind one day. She didn't. That was my mistake. I strung myself along, really. She never led me on in any way. It hurt to learn that she had sex with the next guy relatively quickly after I waited so long. But she is my ex, so that is not my business anymore. She is allowed to change her mind. She can have sex, or not, with whoever she chooses. I don't get a say in that. My hurt is an emotional response, not a logical one. Logically, I see she did nothing wrong by me. I'll get over it. It's just my bruised ego if I'm honest with myself. Feeling I'm somehow a lesser man because she took that step with the next guy. I know objectively that isn't true, but I sure feel it. I was not a perfect boyfriend, and I have made mistakes. I have learned from them. I don't regret breaking up with Ellie and still think it was the right decision for me. Enough background. A few things have happened. Last weekend was the Australia Day long weekend. I was on a camping trip, in the Grampians for any Aussies reading. It was so nice to be in nature, to do some bushwalks with friends and decompress. It felt good to talk about the Ellie situation with my mates around the campfire. Most of them knew Ellie pretty well from our years together, and they had a range of views, just like the commenters on my post. And I got the usual good-natured shit about still being a virgin. I learned there's an expensive bottle of scotch they bought a while ago that's going to have its seal cracked when mine is. Bastards, lol. One great question a friend asked was whether I would have ever decided to reach out and take Ellie back if she never reached out to me first. The answer is no. It was so obvious to me. That cut through a lot of the confusion for me. I was being too passive in this situation, and needed to do what I wanted. Not just react to what Ellie wanted. By the time I was on the way home, I had decided to not get back together with her. But that was moot. When I was driving home and got a mobile signal again, no mobile network where we had camped, the network delivered a bunch of messages from Ellie all at once. She said she was wrong to ask me to get back together and that she's back with Tim now. She also texted that the thing with Tim is more serious than she told me when she last met with me. She apologized for misleading me about her and Tim's relationship. If you remember, she called it a fling before. She asked if we could meet to talk about it. I was not happy, so I just texted back no. Not very mature of me, but I wasn't in the mood to hear more about all this. And I was surprised and pissed off that she lied to me. That seemed very out of character for her. She tried calling me, but I didn't want to answer. She sent another text saying, "Tim and I had a fight. I shouldn't have come to you. And finally, I'm sorry. When I got home I was an idiot and let my curiosity get the better of me. I looked up Tim online. His real given name is uncommon, so it wasn't hard to find. Found him on LinkedIn, which gave me his full name. Ellie is one of his connections and he works at the same firm, so I was confident it's him. He's a director at their firm, one level below partner. He also has pics on Insta. Lots of posts about his adventures around the world at various events and exotic places, as well as shots with an expensive-looking car. A few photos of him with Ellie with their arms around each other in Singapore in November. I guess that confirms it was serious. He wouldn't have public pics with her for a casual fling. All that just made me feel bad. No good comes from comparing myself to my ex-successful boyfriend. Ellie is not my girlfriend and I'm not in competition with Tim. So I won't do that again. My ego's bruised enough already. I have been living a very frugal life my whole time at university, aka poor as fuck, so I know I can feel inferior when I see people with wealth. That's another problem for me, problem to sort out. Anyway, all that was on Sunday evening. On Tuesday evening, Ellie knocked at my door. She said that she knew I didn't want to talk to her, but she felt bad about everything and hoped I would let her explain herself, clear the air, then I'd never see her again if that's what I wanted. I let her in. I was not happy with recent events but figured I might at least get a clearer idea of what's going on. It was a long, heavy conversation over 4 hours, but here's the gist as I remember it. When we broke up, she was devastated. She said it took a couple of months before she started to feel a bit better. She missed me constantly and wanted to see me the whole time, but when I ended it we agreed to keep apart and heal. In September, she met Tim at work. He manages a different team, she doesn't work for him. She said he was very charming and attractive and showed almost immediate interest in her. They got to know each other and he asked her out. She was worried it was a rebound but felt so much better getting his attention that she went along with it. After dating for a while she developed feelings for him and that later led to a sexual relationship. It wasn't a fling and she dated him for a while beforehand. I asked about whether he had pressured her into sex, last time said he was very persistent. She said she was trying to not upset me. She thought if she gave the impression she was reluctant to have sex with Tim that I wouldn't think as badly of her. So it was a story to try and spare my feelings. I told her it just made me worried she had been assaulted. She looked shocked at that and said no way, she was actually the one who initiated their sexual relationship. I said although I don't like that she lied to me, I can understand why. I don't think she did anything wrong changing her mind about abstinence. Yes, I was hurt when she told me she was having sex, but I have no right to judge her for anything. She's a single adult and it's her life. I don't think badly of her. She burst into tears and said something like, "I thought you must hate me now." I assured her that I didn't. She said she was sad it didn't work for us, but that she never would have dropped her virginity commitment if we had not broken up. After we broke up, she decided that it was a commitment she made to her dad when she was still a kid and it was messing with the life she wants now. So by the time she and Tim got into their relationship, she had already decided she was ready for sex with the right person. I asked about her dad and she just said he doesn't need to know. I asked about why she asked to get back together. Tim is older, she told me he's 32, and has been at the firm 10 years. One day at work, One of the women made a snarky comment to Ellie about being another one of Tim's girls. She did some digging and it turns out Tim has a history. He has dated a long list of women from work, several of them were young graduate employees just like Ellie. The rumor around the office is that Ellie is just the next girl to get used by him. She was horrified. She accused him of using her. They argued and she told him it was over. Soon after that she came to me. She felt as if we might be able to rekindle things now that she was open to a sexual relationship. But my hesitation and time to calm down made her realize that was a mistake. Over the weekend, Tim asked her to work things out. She decided to give it a chance. She tried to call me but they went to voicemail. I was camping. So she sent those messages instead. So I guess that's settled. I don't want her back and she's in a relationship so she doesn't want me back either. We chatted a bit about how our families are going. She congratulated me on finally finishing university. She asked if I'd been seeing anyone and when I told her I'd been studying hard and working a lot since exams, retail job, with no time for girls, she laughed and said I'm still a big nerd. She hoped we could be friendly if we ever see each other. But she wants to keep out of contact out of respect for her relationship with Tim. She wants to give it a real chance of working. Which is fair enough. She gave me a hug, said thank you for understanding and left. So there you have it. Ellie involved me in her relationship drama. I would have preferred she hadn't but at least it's sorted now. I'm glad I paid attention to my feelings and took time out to consider things, as it could have been very messy if I had taken her back. Trusting my gut has been the biggest lesson for me in all this. I still care for her despite recent events. It seems like she is dealing with a lot of complicated things between her new relationship and work gossip. I wish her well and hope she will be happy, whether it's with Tim or not. She was my first love and I expect I'll always have warm memories of her. But I am clear now that I don't want her back. She is my past and I want to look forward. Well, this has become an essay. Tutors at university always told me I was too waffly in my writing. Well, fuck those guys, I'm not a student anymore. I can now focus on launching my new career with no distractions. I've worked so hard for so long to get here. My new job starts on Monday. It's going to be so great building actual real experience in my new profession, not just endless theory. I'll be earning much better money, no more student poverty. And I've got graduation in May to look forward to as well. I'm open to finding someone new but that is way down my priority list. I'm not going to actively pursue that anytime soon. OP on Ellie changing. I came to terms with our relationship months ago. When she came back to me, it stirred up some old feelings, because we'd been a couple so long. But thinking about it now, that was more of an echo of those memories than real feelings. All of this drama was Ellie's doing. I would have preferred she never involved me so I could have been blissfully ignorant of her romantic life. I'd prefer to not know about her worldly, rich boyfriend. Or their sex life. She's definitely changed. The Ellie I remember was scrupulous and honest to a fault. The Ellie I have dealt with recently wasn't like that so much. I think that's why her lying to me pissed me off so much. It wasn't just lying. It was how out of character it seemed. But people change. She's in the business world now, and people there live by different standards to the religious family she grew up in. Anyway, I have cut myself out of her life. So anything that happens with her is hers to deal with. If she comes back to me, I'll remind her we agreed to stay apart and leave it there. I am not looking for another relationship right now. So no Tinder for me. And no, I am not looking for casual sex either. I'm a virgin, but I want a meaningful connection, not just sex. As I said in the post, I'm open to something if the right woman came along. But I'm not actively seeking it. That might change after a while, but right now I want to keep focused on my new career. OP on having closure. A lot of the comments here act like that final meeting was all for her benefit. Sure, she got some kind of relief or closure out of it, but it was also good for me. Seeing who she is becoming just made is 100% no doubt in my mind that we wouldn't ever make sense. She has changed a lot in the last year, starting when we were still together and she had started her job. Random phrases like, work hard, play hard, being generally less kind and more dismissive of others. Clearly she was being influenced by those around her, but it was her choice to take on those behaviors. I love the old Ellie, but I'm not sure I even like the current one much. Anyway, I didn't feel like she intruded. I felt like I got a nice neat ending to the whole thing and can get on with my life with a clear conscience. But we're clear now that it's over forever and I have her promise that she will stay out of contact. If she ever does try to come back I can remind her of her own promise and close the door. Update 2. If you recall from my previous posts, my ex Ellie and I mutually agreed to be no contact after some drama on her part. At the urging of Redditors, I also blocked her to help maintain no contact. I've been working since February as a graduate engineer and it's been everything I hoped it would be. I'm meeting amazing smart people, learning so much every day, and am finally earning a salary after years of being a broke student. Having a little money in the bank and being able to afford to do things like eating out is such a nice change. When I finished university in November, I moved in with my brother temporarily. He'd just broken up with his ex and needed help with his rent. That's where I was living when Ellie last came to see me. He found a new housemate, and since his place was on the wrong side of the CBD for my job, I moved into a shared house in the southeast of Melbourne. The place is a bit run down, but the rent is reasonable, by insane Melbourne standards, and there are lots of pubs, bars and restaurants nearby. The location and my housemates have been great. I'm seeing someone. I'll call her Olivia, not her real name. She's the sister of one of my housemates. We met when my housemates and I had a BBQ and she dropped by. We got talking and were still talking hours later until everyone else had left. Her brother told us to STFU so he could get some sleep, haha. I asked her out that week and we've been close since. My housemate, her brother, has been making fun of us ever since, including more than a few crude jokes when she stays over. We agreed to be exclusive 6 weeks ago, so it's still quite new. She's so cool, and smart, and gorgeous. The chemistry was instant and intense from the moment we met. We just clicked so well. It's such a great time when we're together. Olivia is an accountant at a big firm. One of Olivia's workmates was having a party last month. She asked me to come to meet some of her work friends. We went inside and Olivia introduced me to the woman who hosted the party, her workmate Jess. There would have been maybe 40, 50 people there. I didn't know anyone but Olivia. At one point I offered to grab more drinks. The kitchen was in a separate room. As I was getting them, a guy asked me to pass him a beer from the fridge. I introduced myself and he said, "Hi, I'm Tim." We chatted a couple of minutes about our jobs and how we know Jess, then I just said nice to meet you and returned to the group. I didn't recognize his face as I'd never met him before, but it was definitely Ellie's Tim, his job and firm lineup. And he looked in his 30s, a bit older than most people at the party. Neither of us mentioned Ellie when we were talking. Later on I asked Jess how she knew Tim. She said she used to work at the same firm as Tim, also where Ellie works, but she moved to another employer, where Olivia works. Despite living in a city of 5 million, it's still a small world. On the tram ride home I must have been quiet because Olivia asked what was on my mind. I said that the Tim guy at the party was, or maybe still is, my ex's boyfriend. I said I didn't think he knew who I was, or if he did he didn't say anything. That prompted me to share some history about me and Ellie. Olivia was wide-eyed and said, "You never told me you were a virgin." Then she laughed and said, "Well, we took care of that." She asked if I had any feelings for Ellie and I truthfully said no. I dealt with all that months ago. More recently, there was a formal charity dinner that Olivia was asked to support. Her employer was a sponsor of the event. She was keen to show me off. We were at a table with a bunch of her work colleagues. Nice people. One of her work friends was so excited to meet me, and Olivia can't stop talking about you. That made me feel really good. After dinner a few of us were chatting and I got a tap on the shoulder. I turned around and to my surprise it was Ellie. Tim was with her. It was so weird to see her again. Tim said he remembered meeting me at that party but never made the connection to Ellie until just now. She must have told him about me. Ellie looked very different. She had lost a lot of weight and was very slim. The tight red dress she was wearing made that obvious. Her dad would not approve. Not that she was ever overweight, but I'd never seen her that thin before. She was immaculately made up with what looked to my ignorant eye like expensive jewelry. She'd changed her hair too, now blonde instead of her natural auburn. She looked like a sleek rich girl, not the poor pastor's daughter I remember. Don't get me wrong, she looked amazing, but she looked like a different person. I know it was a formal event so we were all dressed nicely, but this was a major transformation. Despite her glam looks, when I saw her I didn't feel anything for her. Just nothing. Ellie said she was so glad to see me and she had some news, holding out her hand to show a diamond engagement ring. I know nothing about diamonds but it looked pretty big and expensive to me. I offered my congratulations to them both. Just then Olivia walked back over. I introduced her to Ellie and Tim. Olivia put her arm around me and Ellie's smile seemed to kind of freeze. I didn't really know what else to say, so I just said nice to see you again and wished them all the best for the wedding. Tim walked off and Ellie just sort of stood there a moment. It was awkward. Later on as we were leaving, Ellie was staring at us as we walked out. Olivia said later that, "I think she still has a thing for you." I said it doesn't matter. Anyway, cut to a few days ago. My brother messaged me saying Ellie stopped by looking for me. Yes, Reddit, you were right. He knew to not share my new address with her, so all he said was I'd moved out. Next day I received an email from an address I hadn't seen before. It was Ellie. No acknowledgement that she was breaking our agreement to be no contact. No mention she stopped by my old place. It said, "It was so great to see you again. I've missed you," and, "That girl you were with is pretty, how serious is it?" And telling me she and Tim have big plans for their wedding next year and she hopes I can come. I was annoyed because she is trying to make her life my business. Again. Despite promising no contact. Even going to the trouble to make a new email address to get around me blocking her. I showed Olivia the email and she rolled her eyes and asked me to think about why my ex would send me that. Why indeed? Olivia is great at cutting through bullshit and reads people way better than I do. Ellie can't have me back. I'm in a relationship now, plus she's engaged, and it's not like I would go to their wedding. Who goes to their ex's wedding? It wouldn't be right. I don't know why she's trying to contact me, but I can guess that she wants to use me for emotional support again. Or maybe things are rocky with Tim, who knows? Whatever she wants, it's not happening. She has family and friends, she can talk to them. I deleted the email and blocked the address without replying. Ellie promised she'd keep out of contact and just couldn't help herself. I still intend to keep my word of no contact, even if she doesn't. I've also set up a filter to send any email containing her name to the bin. Olivia and I had a talk after that. I asked if she was concerned about the Ellie thing, but she said no, she's not worried, she didn't get serial killer vibes from Ellie. I'm glad none of this has put her off me. So nothing too dramatic, but it does prove you guys were right. Ellie couldn't not contact me despite promising to do so. I was able to sidestep her much more easily than last time. Ultimately, this is a good news story. Life is so great right now. I've got a cool new girlfriend, a fun place to live and a new career I love. It has been easy to leave Ellie behind.
Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you. I found tampons in my husband's car. I wished he had been unfaithful to me instead, so that my kids wouldn't have had to go through this. I am a 29-year-old female who has been with my 30-year-old husband for 7 years, married for 4. I've never had reason to suspect he was unfaithful to me or even remotely dissatisfied with our marriage. He likes to joke that we're still living the honeymoon phase, nearly 5 years, and 2 kids in. I wouldn't have questioned that, or him, were it not for a surprise I found in his car last month. When buckling our daughter into her car seat, I noticed something slotted between the cushions. At first, I thought it was just some stray toy or snack wrapper, so I reached down to fish it out. As my fingers closed around the object, I felt the familiar cylindrical shape of a tampon. Confusion washed over me as I pulled it into view, the bright wrapper stark against the upholstery. This wouldn't have been so unusual had I not had an IUD that has stopped my period for the past year, and I didn't even recognize the wrapper style. It was a brand I'd never used, a small but glaring discrepancy that made my stomach churn. I brought it to my husband's attention later that evening, still holding the offending item like it was evidence in a mystery I was desperate to solve. He didn't seem to understand what it was at first, staring at the tampon in my hand with genuine confusion. "Why are you showing me this?" he asked, his brow furrowing. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "I found it in your car, between the cushions, and it's not mine. I haven't had a period in over a year, remember?" His face remained blank for a moment longer before realization dawned. He shrugged and said it probably belonged to his co-worker, Fiona. His initial confusion quickly gave way to dismissiveness as he waved off my concerns with a nonchalant explanation. "Probably Fiona's," he said with a shrug, turning back to his phone. "She must have dropped it when we went out for lunch the other day." I stared at him, waiting for a sign that he understood why this was bothering me. But there was nothing. No apology, no concern. Just a casual dismissal. It was as if the tampon was no big deal, and I was overreacting. His indifference felt like a slap in the face, leaving me reeling and questioning everything I thought I knew about our marriage. It's not uncommon for my husband to carpool to lunch with his co-workers, and we're both fairly close to Fiona and her husband. The thought of my husband carpooling with Fiona and her husband had always been a non-issue. They were friends after all, and it wasn't uncommon for them to share rides to lunch. In fact, we often socialized as couples, spending weekends at each other's houses for barbecues or movie nights. Fiona and I had even bonded over shared experiences, like the challenges of balancing work and family life. Our kids played together while we chatted about everything from the latest office gossip to more personal topics. It made sense, considering how often they carpooled. I reassured myself that the tampon could have easily slipped out of Fiona's purse during one of these outings, no big deal. Maybe it fell out when she was grabbing her phone or wallet, getting jostled around in the process. No big deal, right? It was just one of those little accidents that could happen to anyone. I brushed it off as a harmless mistake, convincing myself there was no need to worry. After all, our friendship with Fiona and her husband was solid, built on years of trust and shared experiences. There was no reason to suspect anything out of the ordinary. So, I pushed the unsettling discovery to the back of my mind, determined not to let a small, easily explained incident cause unnecessary drama. I put it out of my mind until we had dinner with Fiona and her husband a couple weeks later. I had sincerely wanted to believe my husband. I just couldn't get over the way it had been tucked in the seat and how my husband had seemed not to have any regard for it whatsoever. Maybe playing dumb. I don't know. I did something that I now feel kind of crazy for doing. I faked an emergency, and asked Fiona if she had any tampons while we were out together. She handed me one almost identical to the tampon I'd found in our back seat, and I breathed a sigh of relief. So the tampon there was probably the same tampon here, and in all likelihood, there was an innocent explanation as to why it had been left in the back seat in the first place. I thought I'd seen the last of the out-of-place feminine hygiene products until I found another tampon this morning. This time in my sock drawer. I feel physically ill at the thought of my husband having an affair and even more nauseated at the thought that the woman might have left these tampons out for me to find. If it was my husband's co-worker, why would she give herself away by offering me one the other night? In any other situation I would want to talk to my husband about this, but I feel too sick, and embarrassed, to approach him with what I found. Contemplating every possible source of 2 tampons has been my personal hell for the past few weeks, but I wanted to share an update. Shortly after posting here, I told my sister what happened. The tampon in the back seat and the sock drawer, my husband's cluelessness, the tampon from Fiona, and all the things I suspected but didn't want to believe. We compared tampons, save for the back seat one I had already discarded, and they were a match, just in different absorbents. I hadn't left either in a place where my husband or daughters would have found them and moved them around. My daughters didn't know what they were or where they had come from. My sister was convinced it was Fiona either pucking my husband, pucking with me, or both. Direct confrontation of either party still seemed like a bad idea, so she suggested inviting Fiona and her husband over for our Labor Day barbecue. Unfortunately, they already had plans. My sister and I agreed that it was too soon for cameras without any other evidence, so it was just a waiting game from there. Watching my husband for any changed behavior, there was none. Our house for any misplaced foreign items, there were none, and even the girls for any new friends they might have met. My sister's husband was adamant on this last point, and partly why he was inclined to believe that the tampons were harmless. If anything had been happening in or around our home, he said, it would be nearly impossible to keep it from me and the girls, since my husband was the one taking them to and from daycare and most other activities during the week. I felt a good bit of consolation in that. It wasn't until my younger daughter, 2yo, came down with something last week that I felt any differently. I wanted to be the one home taking care of her, but my husband insisted that I stay at work while he stayed home with her. I was okay with that. My sister and her husband figured it was a good sign that he would take the time off at a moment's notice, and at that point, we were all already beginning to put the tampon fiasco behind us. By the 3rd or 4th day, I was just happy to see a near healthy child and a husband who was helping see her through it. Toward the end of that week though, I came home to something strange. The toddler that I'd left that morning in an old PJ set was now dressed in a onesie I'd never seen before, with a tiny clip in her hair. I can't say I have the sharpest memory, but I have a pretty good sense of what my kids wear on a day-to-day basis, and particularly what kinds of clothes they wear. I'd sworn off the full-length sleepsuits with snaps across the front long before we'd ever had our second. The long snaps are just a pain in the ass and a no-go for efficient diaper changes, IMO. It's just not something I would dress her in, and my husband knows as much. He doesn't plan for, or buy the girls' clothes, and he certainly doesn't accessorize them, so I was bewildered. And kind of floored at the thought of someone around our sick child without my knowledge. I didn't think twice, and I went straight to my husband to ask if anyone had been over to see him or the girls. He seemed confused, like before, and asked me why I would think that. It had just been him and the kids all day. I asked him again, if someone had so much as stopped by to say hello, and he denied it. He told me to calm down. I might have lashed out and come forward with the accusations right then and there, but our older daughter was in the room and she sensed something was up. In a calmer voice, I asked him a third time if anyone had been around our children, and my husband swore that the girls hadn't been around anyone but him. He also denied buying new clothes or doing anyone's hair. With our daughter in the room and my emotions all over the place, I decided to leave it. I couldn't make sense of it then, and it hardly seems clearer now, after I've driven myself half crazy with explanations that aren't adding up. After nearly losing my mind over a hair clip and a onesie, I realized I wasn't getting anywhere with the accusations and half-baked guesswork. I'd gotten so absorbed in the paranoia and misery of my situation that I wasn't sleeping, eating or caring for my kids the way I should have been. And I wasn't getting any answers. So, I decided to pull the trigger on the hidden cameras and have them shipped to my sister's house, with my brother-in-law agreeing to help with the install setup over at mine. Before the cameras were ever delivered though, I got my long-awaited confirmation, last week. The day began like any other weekday morning in our bustling household. My husband and I rushed around, trying to corral our two energetic daughters into their school uniforms, all while attempting to grab a quick bite to eat ourselves. Despite the chaos, there was a sense of camaraderie in the air, as if we were all in this hectic dance together. Once the girls were dropped off at school, my husband and I went about our respective workdays, counting down the hours until we could reunite with our little ones. But there was a strange feeling that I couldn't shake off, no matter how hard I tried, and it only intensified when I received a notification on my phone while at work. A ring notification. Motion at the front door. I clicked on the video clip, half expecting to see the usual delivery person or neighbor passing by. But what I saw left me stunned. There on my doorstep was a young woman leading my daughter into the house, hand in hand, with my husband and other daughter close behind them. My heart hammered in my chest as I watched, my mind struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. The girls were supposed to be in daycare, and my husband was at work. The woman, as far as I knew, was living 2 states away with a court order keeping her there. Yet here she was, in our home, with my husband and children. A wave of panic washed over me as I scrambled to make sense of the situation. Was this some kind of mistake? A misunderstanding? Or was there something more sinister at play? I felt a knot form in the pit of my stomach as I realized that the answers to my questions might be far more troubling than I ever could have imagined. I stared at the screen in disbelief, the blood pounding in my ears as I watched the unthinkable unfold before my eyes. There, on the footage captured by our Ring doorbell, was a scene straight out of a nightmare. A woman I hadn't seen in years, leading my youngest daughter into our home hand in hand, with my husband and older daughter trailing behind them. The shock of the moment rendered me momentarily speechless. How could this be happening? The girls were supposed to be at daycare, and my husband at work. Yet here they were, entering our house with a woman I never thought I'd see again. My sister-in-law. My initial reaction was one of sheer disbelief, a desperate hope that there must be some kind of mistake, some innocent explanation for what I was witnessing. But as the reality of the situation sank in, a wave of anger surged through me like a tidal wave, threatening to consume everything in its path. With trembling fingers, I reached for my phone, my heart pounding in my chest as I dialed my husband's number. I needed answers, and I needed them now. But as the phone rang on the other end, there was no response. I immediately called my husband to ask him what the puck this woman was doing in our house. He didn't answer, so I texted it to him. Even in his stupidity, he probably realized he had messed up by going through the front door, knew I had gotten the Ring notification, and wanted to delay the inevitable. By the 5th or 6th subsequent call though, he did pick up. The woman on the camera was my husband's sister. As I would come to find out later, she was the likely source of both tampons, the onesie, and the bow. She is also registered as an individual with a history of abuse, and a recovering addict, who spent the better part of her adolescence and young adulthood coercing the silence of another one of my husband's family members after she had abused them. I hadn't seen or heard from her in years, and from the way my husband talked about her, I didn't expect I ever would. But here she was, in our house, with our children. It wasn't just the shock of seeing her after years of silence that left me reeling. It was the realization of what her presence in our home meant. My sister-in-law, fresh off another stint in rehab, was the last person I expected to find sneaking into our lives, especially under such clandestine circumstances. The gravity of the situation hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't about a random tampon or a harmless mistake. It was about deception and betrayal at the deepest level. Suffice to say I was livid. It wasn't an affair at all and still, somehow, infinitely more disgusting knowing who it was and why all of this had been happening. Apparently, my sister-in-law had wanted to reconnect and make amends with people she'd hurt. And my husband was high on that list. The irony of her attempts at reconciliation through deceit and intrusion was not lost on me. My husband didn't want me to know or, worse, try to keep her family, our children, away from her, so they'd been meeting in secret, often at our house when I was at work. They would enter through the garage, in my husband's car, so the Ring camera at the front door wouldn't tip me off. The level of planning and secrecy involved made my skin crawl. She spent the night on a weekend I had been on a business trip and slept in our bed. The very thought of her in our home, in our bed, made me feel violated. She babysat our girls on a night my husband told me he had dropped them off at his parents'. The casual way he had lied to me, the ease with which he had kept this secret, made me question everything I thought I knew about him. She bought the girls' clothes and dressed my youngest in the onesie and bow that my husband had promised in his life I had dressed her in myself. The image of my daughter in that unfamiliar outfit, a tiny clip in her hair, now felt like a haunting reminder of the betrayal that had been unfolding right under my nose. And yet, when I turned to my husband for reassurance, for a glimmer of hope in the face of uncertainty, all I found was disbelief and denial. He brushed off my concerns with a casual shrug, insisting that it was all in my head, that I was overreacting to a series of harmless coincidences. My husband swore this was all in my head. The tampons, the onesie, the bow, and all the rest. He was perfectly content to watch me agonize for weeks over a woman he insisted didn't exist. Shrugging off each progressively more unsettling discovery like it was news to him and telling me I was being irrational. He insinuated that I was experiencing postpartum depression, 2 years after I'd given birth. 4 years later I told him that one of my biggest fears for motherhood was to suffer from PPD like my mother had with me, to not be fully present for our babies and be left with a world of guilt and regret as they grew older. But as the weeks stretched into months, and the truth remained stubbornly elusive, my patience wore thin, replaced by a simmering rage that threatened to consume me whole. How could he dismiss my fears so callously, to gaslight me into doubting my own sanity? How could he stand idly by as our family teetered on the brink of collapse? He told me I wasn't sleeping enough, that I missed the girls too much, that I needed to take a step back and reevaluate the state of my mental health. I gave him the benefit of the doubt because he was my husband, and because no other version of events made sense. Now, after a month of this mindfuck, I have nothing to show for my trust but this pathetic situation. And a lot of anger. My husband failed to explain himself. When confronted, he stammered and stumbled over his words, offering half-hearted excuses that made no sense. He muttered something about trying to protect me from unnecessary stress, about his sister just wanting to make amends, but his words were disjointed and unconvincing. Each excuse was more implausible than the last, a desperate attempt to cover up the truth. His evasiveness only confirmed my worst fears. The man I had trusted and built a life with was now a stranger to me, hiding behind a facade of lies and deceit. I watched as he avoided eye contact, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The weight of his betrayal hung heavily in the air, a palpable presence that neither of us could ignore. There was no reasonable explanation for his actions or for the deceit that had tainted our marriage. Every time he opened his mouth, I could see the panic in his eyes, the realization that he had been caught and there was no way out. His silence on certain points spoke louder than any words ever could, revealing the depth of his dishonesty. I knew then that I couldn't stay with someone who had so blatantly betrayed my trust and jeopardized the safety of our children. The thought of my daughters being exposed to such toxic secrecy and manipulation was unbearable. I had to prioritize their well-being, and that meant making the hardest decision of my life. With a heavy heart, I told him it was over. The look of shock and desperation on his face was almost pitiable, but it couldn't erase the damage that had been done. I walked away, determined to protect my children from any further harm. I decided to end the relationship and file for divorce. The decision was both heartbreaking and empowering. It was devastating to acknowledge that our 7-year journey together had come to such a bitter end, but it was also liberating to take control of my life and prioritize my well-being, and that of my children. The divorce process was long and grueling. Each step felt like a new battle in an endless war. There were countless court sessions, each more draining than the last, where I had to relive the pain and betrayal over and over again. My husband fought me every step of the way, refusing to accept responsibility for his actions and attempting to paint himself as the victim. His determination to contest every detail made the process even more exhausting and emotionally taxing. In court, I detailed the discovery of the tampons, the hidden meetings with my sister-in-law, and the lies my husband had told to cover his tracks. I showed the ring footage, which captured her entering our home with my children, and provided testimonies from my sister and brother-in-law to corroborate my claims. However, the court needed more than assumptions about my sister-in-law's character. They required concrete evidence of her past and present behavior, which was not easy to obtain. Despite these challenges, I remained focused on the bigger picture. I emphasized my husband's deceit and the breach of trust, which were undeniable. The court recognized the complexity of the situation and the emotional turmoil it had caused. After months of legal battles and countless court sessions, the court ruled in my favor. I was granted primary custody of our daughters, with my husband receiving supervised visitation rights. The judge acknowledged the need for a stable environment for the children, considering the deceit and the potential risks involved. Looking back, this ordeal taught me several valuable lessons that I hope others can learn from. Trust is the foundation of any relationship, and once it's broken, it's incredibly difficult to rebuild. Always listen to your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. Communication is key. Address issues head on rather than letting them fester. Most importantly, never settle for less than you deserve. My children and I deserve a life free from deception and betrayal, and I am committed to building that future for us. In your opinion, what do you think about this story? Please leave your comment below to let me know. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.